So our next speaker is Jean-Luc Solandt from MCS, and talking to us about these issues, about monitoring and wider MPA benefits. Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Sam. Good to be here. Thanks for the invite. On what is, I think, an early exploration into how an MPA is performing. I think Rob and John wrote quite a lot in that MPA book. Who's got it? Hands up. It's very expensive. But what was really good was sort of, I thought the best the most intriguing chapter was Rob and John wrote about how many MPAs do we need to kind of take things forward. And so they use this term sentinel site. I think Emma used it, obviously line bayers, because it's had some science thrown at it, proper science. So I think that's what we're trying to get at with Eddystone, but we're just scratching at the surface with the methodologies that we use. And I wanted to talk about where it was a little bit, just to add a bit of humour to this, and you'll see why in a way. And Eddystone is a sentinel site because it is Eddystone. Winstanley's wonderful lighthouse that got blown over in a storm in some year like 1798 or something like that, and got turned into the current wonderful lighthouse. If you're interested in lighthouses, it's a great addendum to this talk, because I'd rather talk about lighthouses and perhaps what's happening on the seabed nowadays. But that's just being silly. There's a whole lot of co-authors in this, which is really Matt and Stephen who've worked on the science, but it's principally the work by Sam's team, and Colin and the team are here to actually do the work and have the vision to do it was what's really compelling. It is a lighthouse. I have seen the film. It's a frightening place, and Colin and me... If you do see the film, I wouldn't want to be in the film, so I had to bring that up. I saw the film last week. Don't see it. It's grim. So we've got this huge network of MPAs, and rather sadly, we have a lack of understanding. I spoke to someone in the room about a lack of understanding of what we're meant to monitor in MPAs. I like the WWF Compass tool. That provides us with a mechanism to test all sorts of metrics. But we don't know the ecological rules other than to look at what the features are doing, have we? And as Emma has alluded to, and in the book chapter we wrote, we want to move beyond features. We want to be more sophisticated about what management will do for our seas and society. And so moving from a vast network into understanding what the network's delivering for us is also in the book of Rob and John. And it's worth looking at that in the context of where we come from, where we're going to. It's really important for the IFCAs to make progressive management decisions beyond features, because I think they want to do it. I think we need them to do it. But the questions going back a decade were of this increasing impact of damaging fishing. And there were market conditions that led to this, as Peter Jones writes about. There was a higher fuel price in the mid or early 2000s that drove the scalloping industry to scallop nearer to the coast. And there was greater whitefish prices. There were lesser whitefish quota available to those fishers. So a non-quota, close to shore stock was attractive in market conditions. So of course there was more scalloping occurring close to the coast, all over the nation. And it decimated the seabed for all sorts of other ecosystem services, which our feature-based approach unfortunately doesn't engender in terms of recovery. And of course, there's a paper as to why this changed with regard to the revised approach that I think is a good thing. I know it gave a lot of work to IFCAs, tremendous work that they've done. I now have a job around Europe saying how good IFCAs are, would you believe? There's funding available for me to go and say, why don't you do an IFCA? So even though I slag some of you off, and then some are great, and some decisions are good, and some decisions are bad, generally the model's perfect for democracy. It just needs a bit of help every now and then from outside agencies. I'm sorry I've gone way beyond what the other authors on this talk would talk about. But it's basically a good model. Now, what it's delivered for us is this 3,900 square kilometres of closed area. But what's happening to it? So we had a conversation after a wonderful workshop by David Tildersley. Does everyone remember the workshops in around 2013 when the revised approach was coming in? They were fundamentally vital. I would encourage them to be done again by Natural England and DEFRA. Please do it again, because it allowed everyone to understand what the directive meant for fishing. I mean, without it, we wouldn't have got the measures, I think, with the IFCAs that we have, and one day we'll have them with the MMO in international waters, perhaps, or, sorry, national waters. So understanding the fruits of this, the roots of it, are so absolutely vital. And I remember talking to Colin in 2013-14. Where are you, Colin? Please put your hand, just for my sake. Sorry about the image earlier, Colin. But I spoke to Colin and said, should we monitor one of these sites? And we talked about Eddiston as being a potential site. And then we got the Pig Shed Trust that was mentioned earlier, an obscure trust with an obscure logo that looks like a pig with no shed at all. But there is a shed within which those pigs reside, which is now a base for funding for certain weird projects. And in 2013, they started funding it, and then Princess Yachts, would you believe, who love to look after their own backyard whilst building super yachts. They quite rightly wanted to fund a project which was about conservation in their waters, and also they also supporting some of our seagrass work under LIFE, which is a LIFE project as well. So University Exeter, the Cornwall IFCA, much like the talk we heard from Newcastle, there was a collaborative team that was only enabled because of the revised approach. Hitherto, 2014-15, we wouldn't have felt possibly so in the position of collaborating with our various expertise that we could put in collaboratively to get this fundraising, the kit on the water, and the scientists to be able to analyse the data. So Matt Witt and Stephen came out of the woods, and every winter Stephen Pikesley analyses 450 images for every single animal and plant that is on those images. No plants because it's at 50 metres depth. Tiger Lily is the vessel that's used, which is a wonderful vessel for deploying the kit. 2 IFCA staff officers are in the wheelhouse, one looking at the position of the vessel, one taking the image itself. Colin's on the outside of the vessel, laughing generally and having fags and tea, and he deploys the kit onto the seabed. The boxes that are surveyed have been preordained by our survey team. Here's the kit, which is the sea spider array that was talked about earlier. There are 3, I think, that the IFCAs share.
Quite possibly. I think we have them all down in Cornwall at the moment.
Right, okay. And that's the umbilical that's used to deploy the kit and take the images with it. And the analysis takes place in the Institute in Cornwall. So the mixed management approach, so feature-based approach, the site's designated for reefs. So the reefiest part of the reefs appears to be in these red zones, of which there are pinnacles, and around those pinnacles there is rubble reef. And we know from Emma's work, and quite compellingly we know from Emma's work, reef doesn't end at where the geogenic reef ends. It ends beyond that somewhat. So the buffer zone approach was appropriate for this site, which was to extend the protection measures to 250 metres away from the reefs themselves. This is a schematic that we use on our website to explain to our public that we can do sea search in the shallow waters, but deeper down, we're particularly interested in the flat grounds, potentially where the tow gear operated. Now, unlike in, I think, Lyme Bay, we really don't know very well in a detailed basis where the fishing is occurring. Colin has a good idea. He's out on the water a lot. He understands from talking to individuals. So this is less a scientific approach than perhaps a qualitative understanding of what's going on around the seabed and the site. And the question, of course, is, have we had a disturbed community, and are we moving towards a more enriched community, which is what we want from MPAs? So the design was to set up a study site inside the no-trawl zone, generally adjacent to the reefs, and then a near control and a far control, which is sort of similar scientific design as we used at Lundy to understand the impact of the no-take zone on lobster populations. The sea spider was dropped and 20 images were taken, and the camera moved and was raised to take an image every 1 minute. 20 images were taken in any one tow. It became palpably obvious to Colin and team, and correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, that it was really difficult to try and place the survey transit in the same place every trip. So what we started to understand after about a year of monitoring is perhaps we shouldn't be so obsessed about replicating the exact location, but counting the benthos, the type of habitat under which the array landed. Obviously, we're essentially controlling for depth. Everything is in a region of about 50 metres depth. That's box 1, which is within the treatment, i.e. where the closed area is. And this is initial results that just was starting to be analysed by Stephen in winter last year. Box 1's results, box 2, box 3. The red zone is essentially where side-scan sonar has shown where the reef features are in contiguous form, i.e. they tend to be overlapping, and you can see distinct rise of the substrate. And this, going back, essentially these are anemones in box 1, 2, and 3, cup corals, dead men's fingers, and sponges. And we picked those species because to a certain extent they represent biodiversity, but also perhaps seafloor integrity, those sorts of whole site approach questions we should ask about the enrichment of habitat and maybe the ecosystem processes they provide, like filtration, and of course bryozoans are very good at capturing scallop spat. And essentially box 1 was showing enriched communities, not over time. So we saw enriched communities. Maybe there is less of a reserve effect that they were seeing in Lyme Bay, or maybe that reserve effect will take a longer time to be enhanced through the study, and that hopefully will come out in future years. So box 1 tended to be richer in these benthic sessile organisms, which is to be expected. These aren't images from the actual survey site itself, but serve to illustrate the type of organisms we're talking about. So essentially, one could say at this stage the MPA is in the right place, but the MPA, because possibly we aren't doing enough sampling because it's very costly, is not showing a significant effect over time. Although we will investigate the data a bit further and possibly lump different benthic life forms together to illustrate that. So more of this stuff is in the MPA and the closed treatment boxes. Then you go back to the bigger questions. What makes a sentinel site? Maybe this is the next paper. We need to look at things that I can't get up on the slide because nothing makes a sentinel site. Why isn't it not working? Oh, right. Well, let's just talk about the question philosophically because it's not there. I talked about whether it's well known. Now, no one knows about this site. So is that a sentinel site? Is it long-term? I think only MPAs are studies in excess of 10 years, particularly in this deep water environment because it's 20 meters deeper than Lyme, will maybe show effects that take a lot longer to illustrate themselves, particularly with things like scallop spat. Are they well-funded? Is there multi-collaborative stakeholder support in it? Are there teams involved in it? All those things, I think, have to start to be investigated about our MPAs, be they in Newcastle, Lyme Bay, here, to see what the value added is. As Rob Clark once said, we need more sentinel sites, we need more location where we understand what's going on. So that's it, really. That's the early part of the story.
Thank you very much. That was very much to time. When Colin first came to me with the idea of this project, I was a little uncertain, I think, because we'd had some difficult history in the past around other sites. But I think what I've learned from it and what it's shown other people is the value of putting that behind you and to collaborate and to use your collective strengths to get to a better place and a better relationship. We don't always agree, but we understand where we're coming from. And, for us, that's been a really important output from this, as well as the science. And I'm really proud of the work that we've all achieved, all the partners. I'm sure you've got some questions for Jean-Luc. Simon at the back there.
Thanks, Jean-Luc. Question to you, possibly Colin and Emma as well. It's great to see that the management that's introduced in these sites can have very real and obvious benefits to the species that live in the site, particularly those of conservation interest. What would be good to hear, and what's often very difficult when you're trying to develop management and sell management to those people who use the site for fishing purposes, is the benefits that the conservation and management measures can have on to the fishing activities. So, for example, Emma spoke about the value of Lyme Bay for scallops. It'd be interesting to hear whether that or the site you're studying are showing increased populations of scallops or other species of commercial interest, and whether that's is something you're going to see in the short term, or you need longer to study that?
There is no significant effect of the site on scallop abundance as yet, or might never be. But there are indicators of organisms that other literature has shown to be important. So there are more bryozoans, upright standing bryozoans, which are good for capturing scallop spat. So do we need to obsess over absolutely proving that the numbers are there and spending lots and lots of societies' public money on doing that? Or maybe we need to look at the historical literature, use the precautionary approach properly with a trajectory of where the science is going, to say, let's apply this management now for the benefit of not just the fishery, but also the ecosystem services that these organisms provide us. And I think that was some of the discourse in the Help Our Kelp discussion, which went beyond MPAs to sensible ecosystem-based management. Again, speaking as MCS. But I think we need to do more sentinel site stuff. I think we need to put more social science into this particular study. Sian Rees should come over and sort of interview some people and see what they think of this initial data, which maybe is not showing a reserve effect yet, but do you support it being studied further? So I think these are trajectories of evidence rather than saying we need all the ducks lined up to continue with management.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Tom.
We've just started a conversation, haven't we, about sentinel sites, and it's worth continuing a little bit further because Emma started it, and I'm whatever you had planned to put down. Sorry, it wasn't there, but can we just talk a little bit further about what they would mean? I feel myself that it's got to be perhaps introduced nationally, strategically, where these sites are, that there's funding for them, that we're using similar monitoring techniques that we can make sure we match up. So I think there's more in there, isn't there, about sentinel sites and how we can plan now for the next 5 years to get the story that we need to be told.
Yeah, I think there could be some private-public partnership, again, a bit like the Princess model, because now there are other management measures in. I think maybe external private funding opportunities weren't there prior to this broad-scale management approach of trying to restrict towed gear. I think that is a big selling point with some of these node sites that Emma's looked at for a long time, maybe Newcastle. And then you can probably sell that in a holistic way. And I think the IFCA is the ideal partner on a national basis to look at some of that. If it's not sold as something politically difficult, if it's looked as ecosystem recovery, management of the seas rather than one sector against another, we might get somewhere like that. I think private funders might be interested. But yeah, we could put these stories together in a better way now, and I think that's interesting.
Time for one more question. That's right, working off that lunch.
Thanks. Jean-Luc, if I can pick up a couple of points that you touched on and others have as well, and that's trying to make the distinction between monitoring and surveillance. One of the things you said was we have a problem with many MPAs about what we monitor and why we're monitoring it. But don't we have a problem that very often what we're doing is we're surveying sites, and then post hoc we're looking to see if there's any change, rather than when we start the true monitoring is you know at the start what the end point is, you know why you're monitoring, and you know when you've reached that end point. And I'm just wondering if we're getting to the stage where we're going out monitoring, we're calling it monitoring, but it's surveillance. We're monitoring these sites, but we don't know what we're monitoring to, and we don't know when we have achieved our overall, earlier I talked about objectives and indicators. We don't know when we've met those, an objective or an indicator, because we didn't set those at the beginning.
Yeah, it's a problem. I think it's a problem of the feature-based process. It's very costly, and it's very descriptive. So if you need 20 pink sea fans to emerge from one, and then that's an MPA that's worked, that's nonsense, isn't it? And I think we're getting better at that, but how we then, that's what I was going to put up there, I like to think, and I think was in the whole site's paper, was talking about, can we talk about carbon capture metrics? Can we look at filtration rates from the literature of one axinellid sponge of a certain size and extrapolate that to 20 per metre squared in terms of the functional role that organism is doing. We need to move way beyond just these animals and metrics of 1 to 5 to 10. We never did it, I don't think. We just need to see a trend.
Yeah.
And maybe that trend is enough for now to stop regression of opening areas up, perhaps. But the danger is that we don't use these other things that are for societal benefits in other ways. So I would agree with you. We constantly look at the data, like we are doing at Eddystone, frankly, and going 26 pink sea fans. Right, now we're going to say what that means.
Yes, I totally agree. It's moving from this, well, we've always said, the Habitats Directive is very structure-based, moving towards functional-based.
Absolutely.
Perhaps we're at a point we can pick up later, and that is, and this is probably for yourself and Audrey and Emma, and that's looking at the cost of the amount of science that's been done on these few sites, and then taking the minister's words earlier and saying, okay, so how do we scale that sort of knowledge cost up to all of these sites? And of course, we don't have a hope in hell of doing that, but we'll come back to that later.
I think the capital costs of this project are somewhere in the order of 100,000 a year. If you all the value added of the IFCA takes the brunt of that. I mean, that's the boat and the staff time, 70 grand, a year to hire that in privately. It's immense to sort of go, oh, it happened in Lyme Bay a bit like this. And then to think, oh, maybe we should manage? I mean, really? Is that a cost benefit? I don't know. Anyway,
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.